All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep into Tolkien, like really deep.
Oh, sounds intense.
We're tackling one of his most interesting characters,
Yeah.
Galadriel, the Lady of Lothlorien.
She's one of those figures that just sticks with you even after you finish the books.
Right. And it's not just her power, though she has plenty of that. It's the whole package.
The wisdom, the mystery, that kind of otherworldly beauty Tolkien described.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack all of that. Her backstory, her struggles, and that whole moment with the One Ring.
Because let's be honest, that scene where Frodo offers it to her is iconic.
It is, and it tells us so much about her character, about her strength.
And about Tolkien's ideas about power, temptation, all that good stuff.
So to really get Galadriel, we got to start at the beginning.
And her beginning is about as epic as it gets. Born in Valinor, the Blessed Realm.
The land of what were they called again? The Valar? Like the basically elven gods?
Right, the Valar. So she's not just ANY elf. She's practically royalty from birth.
And she's there for some huge events. The rise of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord.
Think of it like the ultimate evil, and she sees it firsthand.
And then the rebellion of the Noldor, which is a whole other can of worms.
Oh, yeah, massive turning point in elven history, and she's right in the thick of it.
So even before we get to Lord of the Rings, Galadriel's already got this incredible backstory.
And those early choices she makes, they ripple out through the ages.
It's like her past is woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth.
Exactly, which is why understanding her past is so key to understanding her character in the present.
Okay, but let's fast forward a bit to when we actually meet Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings.
And what an entrance she makes. Tolkien really lays it on thick with the descriptions.
Right, it's like, bam, statuesque beauty, flowing golden hair, eyes that shine with starlight.
Yeah, you can practically hear the harp music swelling when she walks in.
Totally. It's almost intimidating. Like she's more than just an elf. She's this force of nature.
And that's deliberate on Tolkien's part. He's creating this aura of power around her.
But what's interesting is that it's not just about looks, though she's obviously got that going on.
It's the sense that she's seen and experienced so much. Centuries of history weigh on her.
Yeah, like those eyes have seen kingdoms rise and fall, battles won and lost, you know.
Exactly. So there's this contrast between that serene exterior and the depth of her inner life.
Like she's got all this wisdom and power bubbling under the surface.
Which makes you wonder, what's she really thinking? What secrets does she hold?
Ooh, good question. And that's what makes her so fascinating, right?
Mm.
There's always more to her than meets the eye.
And that's what we're going to dive into next, the layers beneath the surface of Galadriel.
The woman behind the legend, so to speak. So stick around for more.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, folks.
It is. We're just getting warmed up. The real deep dive is coming up next.
So we've talked about this image of Galadriel, right? This wise, serene, almost angelic figure.
Right, like she stepped out of a stained glass window or something.
Yeah, but let's not forget, she wasn't always like that.
Oh, right. We touched on her rebellious phase.
It was more than a phase. She was a key player in the Noldor rebellion.
Which, just to recap, was basically a giant elven uprising against the Valar, right?
Exactly, and it had huge consequences, shaping the entire fate of Middle-earth.
So we're talking about some serious consequences here.
And Galadriel was a leader in this rebellion, not just a follower.
It makes you wonder, what was driving her back then? Was it just ambition?
Well, Tolkien doesn't spell it out for us, but there are hints.
Like that desire to create her own kingdom, to rule over her own lands.
Yeah, and maybe even a bit of resentment towards the Valar, that whole power dynamic.
It's interesting because it adds this whole other layer to her character, right?
It shows that she's not perfect, that she's made mistakes, even big ones.
Which makes her later transformation even more remarkable.
Right, because by the time we meet her in Lord of the Rings, she's this embodiment of wisdom and restraint.
So how does she go from rebel leader to, well, Galadriel?
It's a journey of centuries of learning and growth and probably a lot of regret.
You can almost feel that weight of history on her, like she's carrying the burden of her past.
And that's what informs her leadership in Lothlorien. It's not just about power.
It's about using that power responsibly, about protecting and preserving.
Exactly. She could have easily used her power for conquest, for domination.
But she chooses to stay in Lothlorien, to create this haven of peace and beauty.
And that's a powerful statement in itself, a rejection of the typical power fantasy.
It's like she's saying, true strength lies in resisting temptation, in choosing a different path.
And that path is about healing, about creating a world where beauty and goodness can flourish.
Which is pretty relevant to our own world, right? Where power so often equals domination.
Absolutely. Galadriel offers a different model of leadership, one based on wisdom and compassion.
And that's something we could all use a little more of, I think.
Agreed. She's a reminder that true power isn't about controlling others, but about mastering yourself.
And speaking of mastering yourself, we can't talk about Galadriel without talking about the One Ring.
That's the ultimate test, isn't it? The ultimate temptation.
Imagine the power she could have had, the ability to reshape Middle-earth to her will.
And yet she resists. She sees the darkness it would unleash, both in herself and in the world.
That scene always gives me chills. It's such a pivotal moment.
It's not just about being good or evil. It's about understanding the true nature of power.
And the consequences of wielding it, the potential for corruption.
Galadriel sees that clearly. She sees what the ring would turn her into.
And she chooses a different fate, a harder path, but ultimately a more noble one.
It's a testament to her character, to the growth she's undergone over centuries.
It's like she's finally learned the lesson that power without wisdom is a dangerous thing.
And that true strength lies in knowing when to say no, when to let go.
Which is a pretty profound message, and one that's relevant to all of us, I think.
We all face temptations, big and small, and Galadriel's example shows us the importance of choosing wisely.
So we've talked about Galadriel's past, her growth, her struggles with power.
But let's not forget, she's also deeply connected to the other major players in Middle-earth.
Oh yeah, she's got a family tree that reads like a who's who of elven royalty.
She's related to Elrond, to Aragorn. She's even got ties to Fëanor, the creator of the Silmarils.
It's like she's at the center of this web of history and destiny.
And those connections aren't just for show, they inform her role in the story.
She's not just this isolated figure in Lothlorien. She's a force that shapes events across Middle-earth.
And her relationships with other characters, like Frodo and Gandalf, reveal so much about her wisdom.
She's a mentor, a guide, a source of strength for those around her.
And that's another aspect of her power, her ability to inspire and uplift others.
It's like she's passing the torch to the next generation, preparing them for the challenges ahead.
Which brings us to another interesting question. How does Galadriel's story resonate with us today?
Right. Is she just a cool elf queen from a fantasy book? Or is there something more to her?
I think there's definitely more to her. She speaks to something deeper about human nature.
That struggle between ambition and restraint, the desire for power, and the need for wisdom.
And the importance of choosing a path that leads to good, even when it's difficult.
So, while Galadriel might be a product of Tolkien's imagination, her story has timeless relevance.
She challenges us to think about the kind of world we want to create, the kind of people we want to be.
And that's a conversation worth having, even if it starts with a fantasy book.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why Galadriel continues to fascinate writers and viewers.
She's more than just a character. She's a symbol of hope, of wisdom, of the power of choice.
And her story, ultimately, is a story about the potential for good within each of us.
Even when faced with the darkest of temptations.
Exactly. And that's a message that resonates deeply no matter what world you live in.
Okay, so where were we? Yes. Figuring out how Galadriel's story still matters today.
Right, because she is this fantasy figure, this elf queen from another world.
But there's something about her that feels, I don't know, timeless, like her struggles resonate even now. Totally. And I think part of it is she breaks the mold, especially for when Tolkien was writing.
Back then, strong female characters were often kind of one-dimensional, you know? Either super evil...
Or super good, like the pure maiden or the warrior woman. No in between.
Yeah, and Galadriel's got this complexity to her, this mix of strength and vulnerability.
She's made mistakes. She's been tempted by power, but she's also grown and learned.
And her power isn't about brute force or domination. It's something else entirely.
Right, it's that wisdom, that inner strength, that ability to inspire and guide.
Which makes her a really interesting comparison to modern fantasy heroines, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. We've got so many awesome female characters now, kicking butt and taking names.
But Galadriel's kind of power, that quiet strength, it still feels unique.
It's like she's saying, you don't have to be loud or aggressive to be powerful.
You can lead with wisdom, with compassion, with a deep understanding of yourself and the world.
And that's a message that I think a lot of people, especially women, are really drawn to.
Because it challenges those traditional ideas of what it means to be strong, to be a leader.
It's like you don't have to fit into a box. You can be powerful on your own terms.
And that's a pretty empowering message, even if it comes from a fantasy elf queen.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just fantasy, right? I mean, think about real-world
The
leaders,
ones who make the tough choices, who put the needs of others above their own ambitions.
the ones who build bridges instead of walls, who try to heal divisions instead of exploiting them.
Those are the leaders who embody Galadriel's kind of strength, I think,
It's not about dominating others, it's about serving something greater than yourself.
which is a pretty challenging idea, but I think it's one that's worth striving for.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Galadriel, what's the big takeaway? What should people remember?
I think it's that true power comes from within. It's about mastering yourself, your emotions, your desires.
It's about choosing wisdom over recklessness, compassion over vengeance.
And it's about understanding that our choices have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us.
So, yeah, Galadriel might be a fictional character, but her story has a lot to teach us about real life
About the kind of leaders we need, the kind of people we want to be.
and the kind of world we want to create, one where wisdom and compassion prevail.
And maybe, just maybe, we can all find a bit of Galadriel's strength within ourselves.
Maybe we can all strive to be a little bit wiser, a little bit kinder, a little bit more like the Lady of Light.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to bid farewell to Lothlorien and return to the real world.
But hey, even though this deep dive is over, the conversation doesn't have to end.
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep thinking about Galadriel's story and what it means to you.
And if you're ever feeling lost or uncertain, remember the Lady of Light.
Her wisdom and strength are always there to guide us, if we're willing to listen.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep asking questions, and keep diving deepest